Verily, Kevin Feige hath turned me into a beta in Thor Love and Thunder. He has stripped me of all my manhood and turned me into a bigger pussy than the Black Panther in Wakanda Forever. You should not have made this movie! You should not have made it! You should not have made it!
Now available in paperback and ebook, The Man Who Rules the World. John Haynes must bring together men and gods to overcome a threat that seeks to destroy the planet. The Man Who Rules the World. Now available in paperback and e-readers everywhere. Disney was offering a $1.99 for a month of Disney Plus, and I decided to capitalize on that so I could watch the latest Phase 4 movie, Thor, Love and Thunder. And I have to wonder if Kevin Feige is subcontracting Marvel Studios movies to Tyler Perry, because when I look at Thor, Love and Thunder, it looks nothing like a Marvel Studios production, but looks and feels like something that came straight out of Tyler Perry Studios. Now, your Thor, Love and Thunder is so terrible, I think a better title for the movie would be Madea Goes to Asgard, because the way your Thor acts in this movie is just like a Tyler Perry character, and the way this movie is structured as related to story seems more like something that came out of Tyler Perry Studios than something out of Marvel Studios. Now, the big problem with Thor, Love and Thunder really starts with the screenplay. And this screenplay is so poorly written, it basically reads like a really poor script that came right out of either a Dayhawk episode of Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, or season 5 or 6 of Xena, Warrior Princess. And if you were a Hercules or Xena fan, you know that the Dayhawk episodes of Hercules or Xena are some of the worst in the series, and a season 5 or a season 6 episode of Xena is just so stomach churning you can't get through it because it's just that horrible. Now, your Thor Love and Thunder starts out with an opening scene of a Gore who is one of these faithful worshippers of a god on another planet. Unfortunately, your Gore is not presented the way he was in the comics. No, your Christian Bale is not given any material with any sort of substance. No, your Christian Bale, sadly, has been given material on the level of a Saturday morning cartoon or a syndicated 90s TV show, and we see him grieving over the passing of his daughter, and then after he grieves over his daughter, he then wanders into a forest on this supposedly deserted planet where there's a god who he worships sitting there, and the god, instead of showing respect for a faithful servant, then goes out here and expresses his contempt for this faithful servant. Now, this is a scene that I believe is meant to show that the gods are extremely arrogant and that they take their servants for granted, but this scene comes across as just so bad, it just really doesn't really help the whole story move along. Now, as your god is mocking this servant Gore, what happens is that there's a guy who conveniently is dead there with the sword, and what they're trying to say is that, oh, he's dead there with this necro sword, and he couldn't kill this god, but as I see it, that god with the necro sword who is lying there is basically just a plot device just to move the movie along. And that's not how you put together a story organically. No, when you have a story, you want to introduce your main character, you want to present what they want, and you most importantly want to present why we should care. But when you look at the opening sequence for Thor Love and Thunder, it basically reminds me so much of how Tyler Perry again structures his movies, where things just happen conveniently for the sake of moving the story along, that it just makes it where you just shake your head as related to how ridiculous it is. Because you have your
Gore, who is suffering, and then all of a sudden he runs into a god, and then the Necrosword is conveniently there, and then he conveniently kills this god, and this is supposed to be his motive for being a villain. I mean, it's a really shallow story as related to setting up the premise for the movie, and when you set it up so weak, you set up an incredibly terrible story. And what makes it even worse is that after we get the Gore set up, we get the Thor introduction. And the way Thor is introduced in this movie really reminds me of what happened with the Salkinds and Superman 3. Now, the Salkinds back in 1982 decided they wanted to make a Superman movie that was featuring a lot of humor, and they thought that the other two Superman movies were too serious, so they decided that Superman 3 would be a comedy. Now, this was a major mistake because this idea of going out here and presenting Superman as a comedy basically alienated all of the Superman movie fans and led to one of the worst superhero movies in history until Thor: Love and Thunder wound up showing up. And sadly, your Kevin Feige has not learned from the mistakes of Superman 3, and he decides to go out here and introduce Thor in a very comical way, and he decides to focus more on making comedy as related to bringing Thor back for this fourth movie, and this was just a calculated disaster as I see it. Now, your Thor is brought in as related to him becoming a part of the Guardians of the Galaxy, which was presented in Endgame, and this is just your Thor being brought back to say, oh, this is what he was doing while your Gore was sitting up here being miserable. They were trying to show, oh, in contrast, here's your Thor, he's having a good old time, but I wasn't having a good old time watching this movie, because basically we have this setup of Thor getting ready to leave the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's all contrived as related to just being another plot device, because the whole sequence with Thor on this planet with the Guardians is all about having it all set up where your Thor needs a reason to go back to Earth, and after they defeat whoever Thor and the Guardians are fighting, he gets a message from Sif, and that message is that Gore is out here killing gods. And that's a big problem for me as related to transition, because here you have your Gore talking about he's going out here killing gods, but we don't get to see him in a sequence doing any of this. Again, this is your Kevin Feige subcontracting to Tyler Perry, I believe, or Taika Waititi, or Hakuna Matata, or whatever his name is. But I believe that Hakuna Matata or Taika Waititi is working for Tyler Perry, because this type of transition sequence is something straight out of a Tyler Perry film. All of a sudden, we get your Sif telling us that, oh, Gore is out here killing people, and then this is just used as a reason to go out here and have Thor have a reason for going out here to fight Gore the God Butcher. Again, really poor setup as related to the story, and what makes it even worse is that they add a subplot with your Jane Foster. Now, this Jane Foster subplot where she's dying of cancer really does not feel organic to the story. It basically feels like yet another plot device, and it's a plot device only so that they could go out here and bring Mjolnir back, and that's the only reason why they have Jane Foster in this movie, primarily because they want to give Thor his hammer back. Well, you could have avoided all of this by just going out here and not having Hela break his hammer in Thor Ragnarok, which was just an absolute garbage movie. And now you want to go out here and bring Mjolnir back because, well, reasons. And again, that's the only reason why Jane Foster is worthy, because if Jane Foster was supposed to be so worthy, why didn't she pick up the hammer in the first Thor movie? Critical question if you want to ask as related to the MCU's continuity, which seems to be broken at this point, because we have your Thor's hammer that nobody could pick up.
I mean, you've got Steve Rogers picking it up in Endgame, even though in Age of Ultron, he couldn't make it budge. And then you have your Jane Foster, who was sitting there in the first Thor movie, and she couldn't pick the hammer up. But all of a sudden, now your Jane Foster is worthy. I mean, what are the rules for Thor's hammer as related to worthiness? It seems like this hammer has an arbitrary reason for anybody picking it up, because in one movie, Steve Rogers can't pick it up. In one movie, Jane Foster can't pick it up. But all of a sudden, they can pick it up. Again, this is the type of inconsistency that we see in Tyler Perry movies, but here it is in Thor, Love and Thunder, which basically starts to feel like a movie with no real direction or real focus. I mean, you have a Gore the God Butcher storyline, you have a Thor storyline where he's just basically there to be, as I see it, a plot device, and then you have Jane Foster, who is also there to be a plot device. So the movie feels very jumbled and feels very directionless, and it just doesn't really come together with one cohesive mission. Now, your Thor, after getting the message from Sif, who winds up being mutilated by Gore the God Butcher, who leaves her for dead. Soon Thor finds out about your Gore, and then he decides to go back to the Asgardian village. Again, this whole plot point really doesn't really flow very well, because your Hakuna Matata, or Taika Waititi, he comes out here and he makes another Tyler Perry type mistake, and that is telling us that things are happening and not showing us what happens. In film, it's a visual medium, and you have to show me the threat of Gore, and you don't show me the threat of Gore early on to make me feel like he's a threat, like the 3 Kryptonians were in Superman 2, because in Superman 2, they showed us your Zod, Ursa, and I think his name is, whatever his name is, the mute guy, but they show us the threat of these 3 Kryptonians and how they take out the astronauts, they take out the military, and they show us how dangerous this guy is, but we get told about this, and again, that's passive storytelling, and passive storytelling in a film destroys a film's pacing. Now, we don't see the threat of your Gore until later in the movie, where we see your Gore going to the Asgardian village to go kill the children of the gods, and your Gore going after the children of the gods is just a point to try to make him look like a bad guy, because the screenwriters couldn't be bothered with taking the time to build your Gore up into a credible threat. But he can't be built up into a credible threat because, well, most of the Asgardians were already killed by Hela in your Thor Ragnarok. And again, that hot mess of a movie had an impact on this movie, and it really made it where this movie really is weak as related to its structure, because as your Gore comes to the Asgardian village, he then creates these off-the-shelf black CGI monsters and then takes the kids to the Shadow Realm. Now, if only those kids had a dark magician or a dark magician girl or a Blue Eyes White Dragon card, maybe they could have possibly wound up already beating Gore the God Butcher, because Gore the God Butcher is such a lame villain. I believe Seto Kaiba and Yugi could have possibly wound up beating this dude before your Thor winds up showing up. Now, as this monster is coming in, that's when we get introduced to your Lady Thor, and your Lady Thor, or what they call Mighty Thor. Again, we get no transition to show us her getting the hammer. We get no transition into us seeing her use her powers or get the power. She just kind of shows up with her new gimmick breakaway hammer as Thor is taking on Gore the God Butcher's constructs, which came off the shelf of Studio 35 at Marvel Studios, and it just comes across again like Tyler Perry. Again, stuff happening just for the sake of moving the plot along. And then after they have the confrontation with Gore, and he takes the kids to the dark, to the shadow realm, where I think Yugi and Kaiba could have easily dealt with this guy, then we have a reason for Thor, Valkyrie, and Mighty Thor or Lady Thor going to the realms of eternity. So basically, again, another sequence that just is another plot device to move the story forward without giving us any sort of character development or giving us any sort of reason to care. It's just basically like a side-scrolling video game, but without any of the substance of a better side-scrolling video game like Double Dragon or Prisoner of War. That's how bad this movie is, because all of a sudden, now they have to go to this realm, and they go to this realm basically just to introduce Zeus. Now, I'm sitting here wondering, why do they need, they say that they need an army to go fight Gore, so I'm sitting there going, why do you need to go here? But it's just basically to give Russell Crowe a paycheck, because Russell Crowe hasn't worked in a while due to his bad attitude, but that's basically the reason why we have the entire sequence with these Olympian gods, and the Olympian gods are there, and your Thor is there, and your Thor is just brought there basically to be further emasculated in this movie, because your Zeus strips your Thor down, and then the ladies have to come in and save them. And as this movie goes on, it just is so ridiculous, because everything doesn't happen organically. Everything happens out of convenience. I mean, Thor beats Zeus and gets the Thunderbolt, and they supposedly need the Thunderbolt in order to help fight Gore. And again, everything is just setting up for the sake of setting up, but there's no real story here. There's no real character development here. And as the movie goes on, your Thor, Love and Thunder just looks like one big blunder. And it looks like a big blunder because this whole movie has no reason for being here, the same way your Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness had no reason to be here. There's no reason for any of these movies to be here, like the first three phases of Marvel Studios MCU were here. They were all meant to set up the Avengers, then set up the Infinity Saga, but this movie really has no purpose outside of reuniting Thor with his hammer and your Marvel Studios showing us why too much humor in a movie just destroys the entire movie. Because your Thor Love and Thunder basically has jokes coming out of it at every second, and as they're throwing out punchlines that the writers are laughing at, the rest of us are shaking our heads because we want to see your Thor taking a situation like gods being killed very seriously, because this is a guy who was putting Thor's very life on the line. But this movie just trivializes everything with jokes galore, and it just falls completely apart. And again, basically feels like a Tyler Perry movie come to life on screen. And if Tyler Perry made superheroes, it would be a Thor Love and Thunder movie. Now, this Thor Love and Thunder movie shows no love for the Thunder God, because it basically emasculates the Thunder God, and as he starts out the movie basically a passive beta male in his own movie, he winds up getting cucked and emasculated by Lady Thor, and he gets further emasculated when, in the climax of the movie, when he goes out here and adopts Gore's daughter. So you've got Thor, who in the Norse mythology marries Sif, has his own children, but in the Marvel Cinematic Universe continuity, he's out here taking care of another man's kids. I never thought I'd see the day when Thor would be turned into a cuck, but here we are. I mean, we've already got Prince Harry being emasculated, and now by the Duchess of Ratchness, Meghan Markle, who has his testicles in a Birkin bag. But in this movie, we get your Thor, who ends up with his testicles in Lady Thor's pouch, in her Birkin pouch, and now we've got Thor further being emasculated further. And that was the saddest part about watching Thor Love and Thunder. They want to try to say that Thor's got a new sidekick. No, Thor just got kicked in the crotch, and he's now been turned into a complete cuckold. And sadly, we've seen Thor go from being a powerful Asgardian warrior to becoming Marvel Studios' version of Homer Simpson. Go! I mean, that's just really sad as related to what happened to Thor. I mean, he has gone from, again, powerful Asgardian warrior to beta male to completely cucked, and it's just embarrassing to watch. And Marvel Studios wants to say that this is a hero. Well, this isn't a hero most comic fans want to see, because you've stripped Thor of his manhood and his masculinity all over the course of 2 hours, and you've turned Thor from a warrior that people took seriously, and you've turned him into a complete wimp that nobody respects. And that's not what a hero is all about. No, that's just what a wimp is, and that's what's happened with Marvel Studios. They have stripped the manhood and masculinity from their male heroes in an effort to elevate weak heroines like your Jane Foster, like your Valkyrie, characters that can't carry themselves and stand on their own 2 feet. No, in order for them to appear to be strong, they go and tear down the man, and that is really weak writing, and that is one of the things that aggravates me about your Thor Love and Thunder. Your Thor Love and Thunder basically does what Tyler Perry movies do. They tear down male heroes and tell us that being a good man is about being docile, submissive, and weak. But most people don't respect a guy who is docile, submissive, and weak. Now, what I really find to be sad is that if I can put fingers to the keyboard and give you a balanced story of men and women like I did in The Man Who Rules the World, where John Haynes is working with heroines like Isis and Eaststeam and Lilith Graves, and they can take on a really big bad guy like God Cassius, why can't Marvel Studios give us the same kind of story with Thor, Love, and Thunder? Because in The Man Who Rules the World, John Haynes never loses his manhood or his masculinity, and as he and Eaststeam work together towards taking down God Cassius, it's a compelling story that shows the man and the woman being on equal footing. Even though they have 2 different frames of thinking, they still work together to overcome the bad guy without either one looking weaker. And the same thing I did with Eaststeam, The Sands of Time, where I showed John Haynes and Eaststeam working together, and both showing us again that the man and the woman can be strong. Again, I can go out here and do this in multiple stories, but it seems like Hakuna Matata or Takedo Watati, he can't seem to do this for Thor Love and Thunder. No, he's following the same Disney narrative where the man gets torn down and emasculated and humiliated in order for the new heroine to appear to be stronger. And I really am tired of seeing that kind of story model, because I know it's possible to give you a balanced story where we see the woman and the man working together and us seeing both their strengths and their weaknesses and how they complement each other. So I do this all the time, but it seems like Marvel Studios doesn't want to do this because they want to pander to women and they want to push this girl power message in many of their movies. But when they do this, they wind up further making the Marvel Cinematic Universe go into decline, because Thor, Love and Thunder, you may as well have titled it Madea Goes to Asgard, because basically your Thor has been turned into Madea, and instead of us seeing a powerful Asgardian god, all we see is a guy in a dress with a wig swinging an Uru hammer. That's basically what Thor, Love and Thunder basically is. It's Madea Goes to Asgard, and it's a major fall from grace for Marvel Studios, and it's a fall from grace because when you think about how great Marvel Studios was back in 2008 with Iron Man and all of the substance that was in their stories. It just pains you to watch Thor: Love and Thunder, where you're spending over $200 million on a movie that has the same production values as a Tyler Perry production, or a syndicated episode of Hercules and Xena from the Dayhawk episodes. I mean, that's a real fall from grace, because your Hercules Dayhawk episode was made on a much smaller budget and sadly had a much tighter story. And your Xena season 5 or season 6 episode, as terrible as it was, even had better character development than what was presented here in Thor: Love and Thunder. I mean, your Thor: Love and Thunder is so bad. I mean, it reminds me of those first season Iron Man episodes of Marvel Action Hour, where they were playing the organ music, and I wondered if your Hakuna Matata or Taquito Watati could go out here and get that organ music. Would he stick it in this movie? I bet he would stick it in this movie, because it's that bad. And again, it's a major fall from grace when you consider what the MCU was, and you consider how great the storytelling was. And it's a major disappointment watching this Thor: Love and Thunder, where your Thor has finally fallen to the levels of Superman 3, and at the end was basically turning into Batman and Robin, because that's what that ending with Gore's daughter basically felt like. It felt like Batman and Robin, and we all know that Batman and Robin in 1997 was nearly the end of the superhero movie, and it's going to take a miracle to get Marvel Studios back on track, because this movie basically shows us how your Marvel Studios is in a dire state of affairs, because their storytelling is just completely off. And it's completely off because your Kevin Feige has gotten too cocky, too comfortable, and he does not take making superhero movies seriously like he did back in 2008. And he doesn't take making superhero movies seriously because many at Disney basically take the comic fan audience for granted, and they think that the MCU is going to be around forever. Well, I don't think it's going to be around much longer, because if you start making movies like Thor: Love and Thunder, which is basically the equivalent of Superman 3 and Batman and Robin, because this movie is, again, one of the worst I've ever seen. And again, at 10 years old, I knew how bad a superhero movie could be after Superman 3, and this movie is just as equally as terrible as Superman 3 and Batman and Robin. I mean, this is just one of the worst I've ever seen, and again, just showing me how low the standards have fallen at Marvel Studios, and I wonder how much lower do the standards have to fall before Marvel Studios finally hits rock bottom. Now, if you want to pick up my stories, which feature strong males and heroines like The Man Who Rules the World, Isis Bride of Dracula, Isis Night of the Vampires, and Isis Escape from Transylvania, you can find all four of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, along with E-Steam: The Sands of Time, which you can read if you have Kindle Unlimited for free. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Bride of Dracula, Goddess Next Door, and John Haynes team up to take on the Dark Vampire Lord in this action-packed Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Bride of Dracula in paperback and e-reader at online booksellers today.